Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome. This is Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio. We're back with another episode of How to Fight. Today, we're going to go over how we would fight Dalton. Does he have a last name? I don't even know his last name. Dalton from Roadhouse, played by, of course, Patrick Swayze. I am joined, as I frequently am, by Andrew Adams. Andrew, how's it going?
Great, great. Dalton was actually his last name,
Oh, what's his first name?
James.
Oh, I didn't get that from the film. James Dalton.
The only way you'd get it is if you paused during the medical scene where his medical records are on the table.
I didn't go at that level. And back again, multiple time contributor to Whistlekick things, my friend Craig Wharem. Craig, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for being here. Now, you chose this movie, didn't you? We invited you on, and then you picked the movie.
Well, so what happened was Andrew reached out, and I kind of we bounced 4 or 5 names off, and it just kind of hit me because I was like, some of the names we bounced off were movies that my dad really enjoys. So then I was like, all right, and then I feel like Roadhouse comes up in the dojo a lot, like in like random batches. So then I was like, oh, it just seems to make sense.
Right. Well,
and breaking down Patrick Swayze seems like a good way for me to contribute.
Sure. This is such an interesting film for us to tackle because it is often lumped in as a martial arts movie, and I hadn't watched it until last night, and I couldn't understand why people were calling this a martial arts movie. And then we get to that scene, which the scene that I'm talking about, and I'm like, oh, this really is a martial arts movie. What the heck? And I'm pressing pause, and I'm like digging around the internet, and I'm searching things, and we'll get there. But it was fascinating for me to watch this after hearing about it so many times.
Yeah, you're right. It comes up a lot, and I know that you watched it for the first time yesterday. Craig, is this a movie you had seen in the past?
Yeah, I saw it when I was younger, like, on DVD or something. And then it's just always on cable every holiday weekend, right? Like it's always on Spike TV or something. So I would click it on and get like half of it. But this was the first time on Sunday sitting through and watching it all again.
Oh, wow.
And so it was an experience again. It was fun.
Andrew?
It was a movie that I had seen many times. I likely saw it, didn't see it in the theater, but I would have likely seen it shortly thereafter. And I'm curious, Jeremy, on a scale of 1, where 1 is really bad, a scale of 1 to best of the best, where best of the best is like obviously a 10.
Oh, okay. So on your scale, 1 is the best. Okay. So if best of the best is the worst movie and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is the best movie, I would have to put this somewhere in the middle, which really surprised me. When this started out, I'm not generally a big fan of 80s movies. I'm really not. When we talked a few weeks ago, when we did the Jeff Speakman one, Imperfect Weapon, I was pleasantly surprised then too. But what I liked about it was the quality of the martial arts, that it was such a great representation of martial arts, of Kempo on screen. What I liked about this was not so much the quality of the martial arts, but the quality of the character. There was so much depth. And this is kind of the downside to our format, is that really the character himself is more or less irrelevant. But James Dalton was such a complex and interesting character that I totally understand why someone like Patrick Swayze, who, if I remember correctly, when did Ghost come out? Ghost was just after this?
It was the next movie he did.
Which was where he got really big, wasn't it? Wasn't that the film that kind of catapulted him? Or
well, so the film that really catapulted him would have been Dirty Dancing, which was the movie he did immediately before this.
All right. So there's a good chance that, timing wise, that he selected this movie before Dirty Dancing blew up. I mean, I'd have to go back and verify that. But however you slice it, this was, well, what? I'm speculating on things that I shouldn't be. So I'm just going to shut up and let somebody else talk. I liked the character. I thought the character was interesting. I liked the movie because of the character. There.
What I liked about him.
Go ahead, Craig. No, go ahead.
Craig, you're the guest.
what I liked about Dalton is, like you said, martial arts from a physical standpoint, he doesn't stand out super like in a really crazy way, but he has that philosophy background, and he kind of like takes the awareness and the pre-planning into account when he does stuff.
Yeah, and that was something that I know we're going to talk about, is that awareness, that forethought.
Right.
Is going to be a big aspect of what we discuss. Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. He had a reason for doing the things that he did. He didn't just go into a fight haphazardly for no reason at all. Like, as opposed to when we talked about the last movie, Jeff Speakman's character, his character was very, hot-headed, and I think we have the exact polar opposite, and I think it's likely because his character has a philosophy background, and he had a method to what he was doing.
Absolutely. So there's the character, there's the film, there's our experiences with it, and so we've got this overarching goal of determining how we each would fight Dalton. But before we go any further, I just want to point out, I was blown away at how at 45 years old, Sam Elliott looked like he was roughly the same age he is now. And they kept calling him old man. And I'm like, how old is he now? And I had to look it up. And yeah, when he filmed this movie, he was 45.
He's my age.
And if I was to put Sam Elliott then next to you now, I would assume there was at least 30 years between the two of you. I'd say he looks really good for 70.
Yeah.
In that movie.
And he, like, my whole goal when I get all gray is to have hair like Wade Garrett does in this movie.
When
he ties that back, he means business. Yeah.
All right. So I've got notes. I think you guys also have notes. We brought up the planning ahead. We brought up the philosophy. We brought up the I wrote down observant. This was very early on. This was that first exchange that he was watching. He's observant. Yep. He's intimidating. He's confident, and he's unfazed. Throughout this film, nothing that happened physically to or around him bothered him. He was cool as a cucumber.
Yep. And in fact, the only time that I saw him even remotely lose his cool would have been when his friend Wade Garrett was murdered. Like, that was really the first time in the entire movie until the very last fight. Well, not the last fight, but the big fight with Jimmy.
Sure. And yet, when after Wade is killed and he goes to the mansion and we see his car driving, it clicks. It makes sense. It's like, oh, okay, he's really upset. He's just going to barrel in there and kick a bunch of butt. Like, this is what we typically see in a martial arts film, is that the hero, the antagonist, the protagonist, just, makes a mistake. They make a tactical error that somehow they dig themselves out of that hole as they're going after the antagonist and their henchmen. And yet when we see that car crash, we're like, oh, he's going to get out and be on fire and beat everybody up. But we realize that he didn't do that, even though that's what everyone was expected. And he took that opportunity to sneak in and murder a bunch of people.
Yep. Yeah. And I will say that was one thing that my wife noticed and recognized, was that although the fighting was fairly realistic, like I was fairly impressed with how well it was done for what I suspect was a fairly low budget movie. I mean, he had great training. I mean, Benny the Jet Urquidez was the fight choreographer for this movie.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's awesome.
Yep. And in fact, and Patrick Swayze himself, he had a black belt in Kung Fu. He studied a fairly extensively in Taekwondo and Aikido and Judo. And actually, Benny the Jet, during this filming, wanted Patrick Swayze to become a competitive kickboxer.
That's really interesting, because one of the things that I'm going to say later on is that I thought his kicks most of the time were terrible.
Interesting.
Like, really bad.
Yeah.
I would, if what you had just said was he had a lot of experience as a boxer, I totally would have believed you, because the quality of his hand techniques versus his foot techniques was dramatically different.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to talk about before we get into the actual fight scenes where things happen were his rules. He had 3 rules for the bouncers. Never underestimate your opponent and expect the unexpected. Take it outside. It's never in the bar. And be nice.
Yeah.
These are really solid self-defense principles. And you can look at them from the perspective of being a bouncer in a bar, but you could also look at them from the perspective of self-defense, mitigation of violence, etc. Number 1 and number 3 are pretty obvious. Don't underestimate your opponents and be nice. But that second one, take it outside. You could look at it as, oh, there's less damage to the bar, but there's also so much less that can happen around you because within a confined space, all those pointy, sharp objects, chaos, it's not an environment you want to conduct self-defense with. I know you guys have both instructed. You've probably discussed the scenario of self-defense in a bar, and it's one of the places that I am least excited to talk people through because there's just so much that can go wrong.
Yeah. And in the go ahead, Craig. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say I agree with the point you were making, Jeremy. And the other thing about taking it outside the bar is it just eliminates the idea that other people could get hurt, right? You've sure. created this barrier, like doing security, because I've worked a door a few times and stuff. And one of the things that they always told us was you want to make sure that the people inside the bar feel safe and secure. And the best way to do that is to find a way to outthink them or be clever, which he does. He demonstrates that at a certain point in the movie as well.
Yeah. Andrew, what were you going to say?
In doing my research for the movie, I actually found an interesting note on the IMDb page that noted that after this movie came out, a number of police departments took that scene and started showing it to their police officers as this is what you should be understanding about how to deal with people, because they are 3 solid rules. I mean, obviously they're not bouncers and they're not saying take it outside the bar, but I see that more as be aware of your surroundings, right?
Right.
And so I found that really interesting that police officers saw that as, hey, these are good rules for us to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. So the first time that we get any idea of the skill of this character is just about almost a half hour in, a quarter of the way through the movie. It's how long it takes to set up all these things that are going on. And this guy pulls a knife out, and then there's Patrick Swayze's character. Bam, knife disarm. It was fast. Nobody saw him coming. It was the word I wrote down, surgical. Like his technique in that movement. I don't know how many times they had to shoot that exchange, but it was flawless. It was absolutely beautiful. And then wonderful use of the environment in using the table to smash the guy. Did you guys have any kind of a different reaction there?
No, the thought I had too, you said surgical, I thought it was efficient, right? Like a lot of times they want to showcase knife fighting in a movie and they want to make them dance around with it and play around with it. But anyone who's trained knife disarms knows that the more you mess around with it, the more likely you are to just get slashed. So it should be quick and efficient. And I agree. I also wrote down environmental awareness of this is an unconventional weapon in a table, so let's bounce his head off it. So I had the same notes.
Yeah, I wrote blindingly fast, that scenario, and I felt it was very realistic. Kind of going off what you said, Craig. Often movies, they're there to make a big long fight scene because it's fun to watch, whereas in real life, if you were a bouncer, you would want the situation taken care of and resolved in as quick a time frame as possible. And that's what impressed me about that very first opening scene.
Yep. Or
the opening fight.
Mm. So I didn't see any weaknesses there. There's nothing in that I would be able to exploit. The first thing that I saw, and this was a recurring theme, and honestly to the point where I think it is a plot hole. It is inconsistent with the character as we see him. A couple minutes later, he walks to his car alone after these threats of violence. Now, the closest I've ever gotten to that kind of exchange, I DJ'd, and I had someone. It was a wedding, and someone was very mad that I played Yellow Submarine, despite the fact that the people
How
that I was
dare
responsible
you,
to were very happy that I had played Yellow Submarine. And there was this drunk guy, and he was in my face, and he threatened me on my way to my car later. I had an escort to my car when I went to get it. Despite the fact that I have some skill, despite the fact that this was a generally happy event, I wasn't going to chance it. He didn't seem to care. And every single time he walked out to his car, when regardless of the slashed tires, which he expected because he bought spare tires, the stop sign in the car, right? He knew that there was the opportunity for violence, and these people were going to try to hurt him, but he still, he wasn't walking in a cautious way. He was very confident, but I don't think that was consistent with the attitude that we see through the film of, I am going to be patient, I'm going to be reserved, I have nothing to prove to anyone, etc.
I kind of saw it. I can see two sides of it, right? One, you could make the argument that he's reading his opponent. He knows that they're more so trying to scare him than hurt him, right? So at the beginning, they put the stop sign to the car, right? And they slash his tires. That's just making it an inconvenience for him. So he could say, yeah, they're not going to try and jump me at night, which I don't think is self-defense wise a very wise decision, right? Like, I would always be prepared for the worst.
Right.
So the other side of that would be, he just has too much of an ego in a way. Like, I can handle whatever they throw at me, and that's that.
And if we interpret it that way, Andrew, I want to hear what you think. But if we interpret it that way, there's a hole. There's an opportunity for something to exploit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one of his second tenet is expect the unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
He expected his tires to get slashed. He expected the car to get junked. That's why he bought a crappy car, right?
Right.
So he expected that. You should be expecting the unexpected. I was also surprised that he walked out to his car all by himself without a care in the world. Very nonchalant.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So about 10 minutes or so later in the film, we get the group bar fight. And this is really the first time where we see him truly in action. And he's doing really good at avoiding things. He is patient, and he gets cut with a knife. Doesn't faze him whatsoever. He goes home and he stitches it up himself. Isn't that the one where he stitches it up? No, that was earlier on.
Yeah,
right? That was after he does the knife disarm.
Yep.
That he stitches it up himself. This is the one where he goes to the hospital and he meets the cute doctor. But he gets cut across the ribs, across the torso. Doesn't bother him. Pain clearly does not affect this guy. And I think that is something incredibly important to note if we're building a profile on how to fight him.
Yeah, I wrote down no pain compliance. So, like, joint manipulation, things like that probably won't have a super effect on him. It has to be something where whatever you do to him has to be a quick disabling thing where he can't move a limb or something like that. Not, I'm going to hold you in a wrist lock or an arm bar and make you submit, because I don't think that would happen.
Yep. Maybe. I mean, in his own words, pain don't hurt.
Right. He refused anesthesia. Another 10 minutes later, after we cross the point where he says nobody ever wins a fight, which, that's, I should put that on a t-shirt. That's something I've said for many years. We see a group fight again, and one of these the dirtbag guys comes in with a knife on his boot, and he notices that. I mean, that is something that required tremendous study. That wasn't just something you're going to notice casually. He was looking for it. He does this incredibly rapid threat assessment, and he's decisive. The thing that we get to see here, and I think it becomes something that is a recurring theme, Dalton looks to be a really good fighter through this movie because all but one of the people he faces are terrible.
Very true.
To the point of hilarity. It is amazing how bad these people are.
Mm. Well, but I think the movie goes to very good points, very good lengths to show you that the movie doesn't try and show you that the people he's fighting are good. Like,
sure,
it's clearly obvious that these guys are bad.
But what that means is, if all of his experience is in dealing with people who don't know how to fight, who have zero skill, and we're talking about one of us fighting that character, that it's an unknown, but I think it's an unknown that would be to his disadvantage, because I think at various times in training, I've had phases where I get into the habit of sparring people who are younger students, not necessarily younger in age, but younger in skill.
Mm-hmm.
And you adapt, you get used to what you have to do. You're not operating at your peak. You're kind of down here. If you're used to hanging out down here and you get somebody who's suddenly going to challenge the full extent of your skill, it's going to take some time to dust that stuff off. So I think that's a gap to exploit.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I agree too, because we see that a little bit later on. He kind of gets it handed to him by the one person there who shows any sort of skill.
Right. The other thing I think of note here, and I think that this is an interesting part, and we see other aspects, he's willing to do what has to be done to end the fight.
Mm-hmm.
He does not, his metrics for what is right and wrong in the context of a fight, and when we get that kind of side arc around whether or not he killed someone, take the biggest guy, smash his knee, he'll drop like a stone, right? He says that at the end of this, and I or maybe it's the beginning, and I found that really interesting. And then you've got later on where he rips the guy's throat out.
Yep, which was
Literally.
not the first time. Which was not the first time he'd done that.
Right.
Well,
and so he's obviously not going to hesitate. Craig?
Yeah, that feeds into a self-defense principle, right? Like if you're in a fight for real, like your responsibility is to go home at the end of the day, and so you have to be able to justify in your own head and define what that looks like to you, and be okay with whatever you need to do. So that, to me, that's a pretty realistic part of this movie, because you also see in the diner when they're kind of talking about it, he still struggles with what has happened in his past. It's not like other martial arts movies where somebody gets crushes and kills 20 people in a final fight and then walks home at the end of the day and has spaghetti for dinner. They show that it weighs on him still.
Yeah, I would agree. It definitely, the movie did a good job of showing the internal struggle that he had with doing that. And in both instances, when he murdered both of those people, it was when a gun was drawn on him.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important part as well. I will say my wife's response in terms of how she would fight Patrick Swayze's character Dalton is she would just wear a metal gorget over her neck and then she would be fine.
I like it. This was the point in the movie where I started having thoughts that Patrick Swayze was the modern Samson from the Bible, and that maybe if you cut off his hair.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If you cut off his hair, maybe that's where his power is. and he would die. Moving on. A few minutes later, he's on the hood of the car. He's hanging out, looking at the stars, whatever. And two of the jerks come over and, we've been looking all over for you. And again, he's unfazed. And in fact, he's so unfazed, he's so calm in that situation, probably because he's spent the majority of his professional career dealing with intimidating situations, and his adrenaline doesn't even pop up anymore for this. He pops off the hood abruptly and startles them.
Yeah.
And I found that I think of any of the scenes was probably the most telling to me of how cool in these situations he would be, because he doesn't just nonchalantly get off. His wits are about him so much that he says, I'm going to turn the tables on them. I'm going to go with them into an obviously dangerous situation. And I'm that confident because of my experience, because of my ability to think clearly.
And his ability to put them on their toes.
Yeah.
Like jumping off the car quickly. That was a calculated move. He did that on purpose.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, it's a quick shift in power dynamic. They thought they had the upper edge, and then when they saw he wasn't phased at all, it was, game on. The old Lord of the Rings quote, right? The closer you are to danger, the farther you are from harm.
Right.
That was exactly what he did, was he shifted the whole thing.
Would have been interesting if Ents had come out of the woods and started, throwing rocks. We could have a really interesting crossover.
The other
Lord of the Roadhouse.
I think Whistlekick should fund a movie, Lord of the Roadhouse.
Roadhouse.
And for anyone who may not get it, that's a reference to a multiple recurring reference in Family Guy to this movie.
Oh, and it's classic.
Yeah.
Oh, so funny. The other thing I liked about that power dynamic was like so there's two of them and he jumps off and confronts them, but later on Wade Garrett says, "Oh, they said I was lucky. It was three of them," and he's all beat up, and he was very clearly like Dalton's mentor at one point. And he said, "They let me off easy. There were three of them." So they play this duality of, again, kind of going back almost to that arrogance where there's two of them and he jumps off to face them, but his mentor, who's clearly getting older and can't move as well, three people shows up and he's like, "I'm lucky I'm still here because they beat me up pretty bad." Yeah. Because there were more than one. So it's an interesting duality that they play off of.
Another 10 minutes or so in 15, there's a situation where there's a group fight on the loading dock and he's holding his own. He's doing pretty well until he takes a bottle to the head. But there was one aspect of this that I thought was obviously disastrous, and that's that he didn't move out from the middle. Anytime anybody's teaching self-defense against a group, even if it's a group of two, what's the first thing we say? Don't stand in the middle. And this is something that either he was too overconfident to exercise, he did not know it, which would seem surprising, or he was too overwhelmed to properly think and or reflect his training. What do you guys think on that?
I think again, it kind of goes back to the, "Oh, I've got this, I can handle it" type of situation. I think to me that was the most glaring part of the movie, where it was like, well, the rest of the time you've been pretty smart and calculated and observant and kind of aware of what's going on, and you're standing in the middle of these four. You know they're not going to go one at a time. Like, you've got to move, and you know that there's a whole box of bottles and stuff right there. So there's, the deck was clearly stacked against him in that way. So that part, to me, I wrote it down, was I felt like maybe he became a victim of his own confidence in that sense, which again is just something to exploit. Something when fighting him you want to factor in.
Yeah, I wrote down, I sword fight in a medieval society, and we have an expression when you're fighting multiple people of the one against the many. The one's job is to dot the I. Right? If I'm fighting two people or three people, I want to try and get them in a line, so I'm the top of the I. And conversely, if I am with a few other friends fighting one person, our job is to cross the T. Right? We want to make a straight line and approach this way and start to cross the T on the one person. He did an incredibly bad job of dotting the I because he stayed the bullseye in the middle of a circle.
He did. He absolutely did. He stood there. He got beat up by three people until Wade came out and backed him up. And then I loved the guy who was in the background still just smashing bottles. Like, your friends are in a fight and you're just going to break bottles. Like,
are you talking about the giant guy?
Yeah, he's just taking cases of alcohol and just breaking them in the middle of a fight.
Yeah, he's like 9 feet tall.
He was a very tall man. He was. Anything more on that scene?
Well, in Dalton's defense, so this is a fun little Easter egg. It's a cameo. That last guy in the fight, the curly-haired guy, I think his name is Morgan in the movie. He's played by a professional wrestler. That's Terry Funk. So he was an old school wrestling.
Oh, fun.
WWF wrestler. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Cool. There was also a cameo apparently in the movie of Benny the Jet Urquidez. In looking at the trivia on this movie, it said he made a very small cameo, and I read that before I watched, and I scoured the movie looking for him.
Find it.
I couldn't find it. Perhaps his scene got cut. I don't know.
Oh,
originally, when this movie was first shown, not publicly, but apparently it was 3.5 hours long, and they had to cut it down. Yeah, it was much longer.
Wow,
that's a lot of Roadhouse.
I want to get my hands on that cut of the movie. I want to see what they took out. The next thing that we see, he's in the barn. He's clearly upset, and he's practicing on a makeshift makawara, which I thought was awesome. And this was an example of some of these aspects of training that unless you've done traditional training, you don't get it. He's just, he's punching a board with a, beanbag on it or whatever it was. But, we all recognize that for what it is. And this was the point when I saw, okay, his punches are solid. They're great. They look accurate. They look powerful. They look like they are technically proficient. His kicks were pushes.
They were dancers' kicks.
Yes. It looked like his choreography came out of Dirty Dancing. That's a great way to put it. And thus there was no power before full extension. Now it starts to change when you see him shortly after with the heavy bag.
Mm-hmm.
And some of his kicks were better. A lot of his kicks were kind of those little rotation round or turning. I think sometimes in Taekwondo, competitive Taekwondo, they're called cut kicks. I think that's what I've seen them called. And they're just kind of, there's not a ton of power there. And so the interesting thing that I was thinking, this is the first place where I'm going to say, I'm starting to get an idea of how I would handle this. I want to get in closer on the legs because they're at the very least, there's little power there or less power, but his punches, I don't want to face those punches because they're strong.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I did notice, like, if I had to, I'd get kicked by him more than punched by him. Like, I'd prefer to be kicked by him just because, again, he moves quick and he has those interesting kung fu angles on some of his strikes where it's not like a boxer. They're kind of coming from a 360 degrees. You don't really know where it's gonna go.
Sure.
But to me, look, personally, what I saw was I wanted to be closer to him than his punching range. That's because he relied on people being in kind of like that middle zone where you can be kicked, you can be punched at range, but he didn't fare as well in tight. So kind of those more, not quite clinching, but like that Wing Chun level where you're in really close and you're just striking that center line seemed to be the part where he had the most trouble defending against.
Andrew?
Yeah, I was surprised at how. I was surprised. What I wrote down is he used a lot more really long range attacks than would make sense for someone in his job. And those long range attacks were not very effective. Like I mean, in the Family Guy episodes where they've talked about Roadhouse, what does he always do? He always kicks. Right. And he often does a spin kick. And Dalton did a large number of spin kicks, which doesn't make sense if you're going to be a bouncer in a bar. Sure. Confined spaces potentially. Sure. And, almost all of his long range attacks did very little.
It's a great point. The next fight that we see, he's knocking the guy off the bike. He does a great job of evading. His kicks are a lot better in this scene. And it was almost enough that it made me question the consistency of that technique. But since for me, the majority of the film, his kicks were not that good, I'm going to say that this is the fluke here, not the other. And that I'm, my strategy as I'm building it is around staying around kick range. And what do I want to do while I'm there?
Yeah.
How about you, Craig?
Yeah, I still think, like, for me, as I watch, I watched a lot of it happen at range, right? It almost looked like people were just mirroring him. So that's why I feel, you get in close and you control that center line, those straight line strikes right in towards the torso and towards the face. And then if you can control, because the other thing that we see a lot is him get grabbed and held. He doesn't have a whole lot of grappling skill. So if you can get in there and overwhelm him, get past those kicks into the center, and then work those takedowns, whether it's judo or wrestling or whatever, and control him from the ground, I think you can finish it rather quickly. It's just a matter of getting past, not so much the kicks, but getting past those longer range strikes.
How tall is he?
I don't know.
I'm going to ask Google.
Okay. Because that's an important point. I mean, he's not heavy, but he looks very strong. He looks like he's 8% body fat, nothing but muscle.
Yeah.
But I'm going to guess that he's somewhere between 5'10" and 6'1".
He was 5'10" and 160 pounds.
Okay. So if he's 160 pounds at the time of filming this movie, there is nothing but muscle on this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I would concur with Craig that, he didn't do much joint manipulation. I think the only time I really saw that was the very first scene with the knife. And other than that, I don't believe he did any. And even when he got grabbed, his first reaction was to strike rather than, trying to evade in any sort of grappling type of way. So I think that should be taken into consideration as well.
The only other thing I saw that maybe showcased some understanding of joints and working with joints, other than, knees and his very explicit statement on knees, was when he fought the guy who came off the bike, who used to have relations with people like him in prison.
Yep.
He kicked at one point and he deflected it and braced it against a tree. And it looked like he was using the tree as a fulcrum against the knee. And I found that to be not only a really cool Jackie Chan style bit of choreography, but really effective.
Yep. And those two actors apparently didn't really get along well when they first met. And by the end of the movie, they did, because they both held very firm beliefs that they should do 90% of their own stunts.
Oh, wow.
And so the fighting that they're doing in that end scene it's really them. It isn't cutaways to stunt doubles. And in fact, a lot of the stuff that happened there was improvised. And so like when Jimmy takes the log and hits him with it, that was not choreographed. He just grabbed it and hit it. And apparently Patrick Swayze got up a jacked up knee during that particular scene. And it affected some of the filming afterwards. And he was that's one of the reasons why he decided to do Ghost after this movie, because he knew it wasn't going to be as physically demanding as one of the other movies he was offered, which was Tango and Cash.
Oh, interesting. All right. The next thing that we have is the knife fight scene, where he's apparently used a knife a lot, because he's grabbing them out of the air and throwing them accurately, and again, unfazed at them flying around his face. And with the exception of that knife, anytime, and this surprised me, we had one experience with somebody holding a pool cue. That's always been my go-to. If I'm ever in a bar and there's a pool table, I'm looking for where that pool cue rack is in case I need to know.
Are you gonna do that bow staff pattern he did on the dance floor too?
Those were solid movements. He was
know.
incredibly skilled throwing that thing around. I think, honestly, in the fight where they had the two of them, I think they did not do that character justice. I don't think it would have been as lopsided.
Yeah, I agree. I think the pool cue, like, to your point about weaponry and stuff in the bar fight, there would be more of it, I would think. Like they didn't really showcase, and when the ones they did showcase were ones that didn't always, the knife in the boot, so right foot, things like that, as opposed to like somebody just breaking a bottle and hitting you with it, or things like that. So I think, one, I want to know how he got so good at throwing those knives and like being that comfortable around knives, because even with training knives, sometimes it freaks me out, like. But two, I think that, it's showcased for him that that he's stoic, he's unfazed. He just enters that zen, and you can't rattle him.
Sure.
My problem with the pool cue scene was Dalton sees this person who is clearly skilled with a staff, in this case, a pool cue, who has a long-range weapon in his hand, and he says to his 3 or 4 guys that are not nearly as skilled as he is, yeah, go ahead, you go get your butt kicked. Like, how did he think that was going to end any other way?
we've all had instructors who have had us do things that didn't work out well for us in the name of education.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
I mean, that's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's him not being the best manager, right? Like, obviously, he probably, if I'm looking at that and I'm putting myself in that place, the only reason I would send 4 people out there is so I could gauge this guy's skill better, while not trying to hit.
Self-preservation.
That's it.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a good thing to do. That's just the only reason I can see him doing what he did.
All right, our last scene. Are we ready to go to the last scene?
Yep.
So that big kind of fight at the mansion, the big house, whatever we want to call it.
The Batman scene. That's what I call it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Again, we have the use of surroundings. He pushes a stuffed polar bear over on someone, and then we have really again an asset and a liability for him. He again is going to the knee where he can, but he does an absolutely abysmal job against is it Jimmy, the boss guy?
No. Jimmy was the guy who he's ripped the throat out of.
Oh, okay. Who was the kind of mafia-esque guy? What was his name?
Crud, I can't remember.
Anyway, the big bad guy. He picks up spears and he throws a spear, and then he grabs another one and pretty much just starts beating Dalton with it. And Dalton's like, I don't know what to do about this. And so again,
Brad Wesley.
Thank you, Wesley. So that might be a possibility, using a long range weapon. That doesn't enter into my kind of full strategy because I'm not generally expecting I'm going to have access to weapons.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of finishes up my notes. Do you guys have anything else before we unpack what we would do?
No, the only other thing that I noted in that final scene, the reason I called it the Batman scene is because he takes out 20 people, but he does it so stealthily that no one sees him coming.
Right. Or hears it somehow.
Yeah, and that polar bear bit is my favorite part. Makes a great part. Every time it makes me laugh. Every time.
Andrew, anything else on
your
notes?
I don't think I had anything else.
Okay.
I will say I do laugh at the polar bear scene every time. And at the very, very, very end of the movie when they're like, Tink, do you have anything? He's like, a bear fell on me. It's funny every single time.
It's a great point. Andrew, why don't you go first? So if you had to kind of codify what you would do if you were fighting James Dalton, what would you do?
So I would, as was discussed earlier, like his long range attacks were not very effective. So I would look to stay more on the outside. I would use his rationale against him in terms of the knees, because one thing I noticed is Wade Garrett, and this was really quick. I had to rewind it once to just make sure I did see that correctly. He was an old guy, moved a little slower, but he checked the kicks that came into him. He did lifted his leg and he checked those kicks. Which, if anybody has ever been kicked in the legs before, checking it makes a huge difference in terms of the damage done to you. Dalton didn't check kicks at all.
Right.
Not once. So I would be looking to use myself using long range attacks. I would be on the lookout for that stupid spin kick that he does. Not that spin kicks are stupid. He did them in a stupid way. And I would use that as an grounds to gain some ground on him to get past the boxing range. Like you guys said, I don't want to be in this range,
Not with him, no.
No, not with him. But if I could gain the distance and take him down, even if it's to throw him down and get in a kick and then get back out, if I didn't have a good enough position to get into a ground mount of some sort, just take him down, get out of there, and do it again. That would be what I would look to do.
Okay. Craig, what would you do?
Yeah, so I like your idea, Andrew, of working those kicks in the leg checks and stuff. I would close that gap. And in boxing range, one of the things I noticed is, again, he didn't necessarily have that straight line. He almost circled things around a lot. So a faster way to get past a circular line is a straight line, right? So as he's doing those circular lines, that's where I'm using kind of the Kung Fu background I have in the Wing Chun, and I'm doing those chain strikes, and I'm kind of checking and trying to control him until I get to a place where I can clinch him. Once I can clinch him and I've got control, it's going to be a matter of just getting him down into a pin, and then again, no pain compliance. So I'm just working on getting into some sort of choking situation with him where I can just put him to sleep. Like he strikes me in everything we saw that if he got brought to the ground and somebody was trying to pin him, he'd roll onto his stomach to try and get back up. I don't think that he has a lot of ground experience. So instead of trying to push me off and get me into a guard, he would try to roll himself over and push me off. And when he tries that, would be the best time to try to go in for those controlling positions that way. Yeah, I think that's what I would do.
I could see that. He's got some reach on me. He's got, I mean, not currently, but if we had the same body fat, he'd definitely have some weight on me. I got a little bit more than he does, but I would be attacking legs. I'd try to stay at kicking range. I would be encouraging him to kick because I feel like his stances and his kicks were the weakest part of what he had. On the stance side, what I'm talking about is when he would take those sharp angles, Craig, like you talked about, and he would cut out to the side, he was loaded so low that if that punch, that kind of uppercut hook combo thing that he was throwing, if that didn't hit, he was totally set up for a kick in the face. Now, in order for him to throw that, I'd have to be close enough. So I'm not going to be looking for that. I don't want to be there, just like Andrew said. So I would be trying to play that line, getting him to try to kick me for two reasons. I'm looking to attack the legs, frustrate him, punch him in the shin, punch him in the knee, check the kick the leg, do all those sorts of mean things that kind of extend it, with the hopes that he would end up throwing one of those kind of really interesting half spinny sort of pushing side back kick things, because those were telegraphed so much and there was so little power until the end range that as soon as I saw that coming, I'm going in, I'm going to take that kick, and I'm locked around his throat at that point, because I think I could cover that ground at that point. That would be my best bet.
Then you use his technique against him.
Right. And then I would rip his throat out, and I would use it as a straw.
Wow.
Oh man.
Wow. Well, there we go. Do we have anything we want to add? We went deep on this film, a lot deeper than we went on the last one.
Yeah. The thing I would add is, my wife had another way she would fight him, which would be to just be Wade Garrett, because apparently he taught him everything he knew. So be Wade
caught his punch.
Yeah, exactly.
That's wild.
Yep. And then the last thing I would add is I wouldn't want to fight him. I'd want to be his friend. He was cool.
He was a cool guy. He
Yeah,
was a good
no
guy.
doubt.
He didn't like bullies. He didn't like fighting. He just didn't like people taking advantage of others.
Yeah.
Pretty solid hero. I understand why people like this film.
And it's one of the, there are lots of movies in the world that have martial arts. There are not a lot of movies that have crossed over into other pop culture references. True. Obviously Karate Kid is probably one of the biggest, right?
Yep, I would agree.
But this one has a fair number of crossovers. We talked about Family Guy. We talked the TV show House, the drama hospital show. Like there have been other ones too. So
yeah, I feel like if you say the word Roadhouse, everyone instantly thinks of Patrick Swayze and knows the movie, even if they hadn't seen it. Like,
yes,
they just know it.
Yeah. All right. Good to close up. You guys. All right. Well, yeah. Hey, everybody, thank you. I appreciate you watching or listening. And if you have a suggestion for the next movie we should tackle, let us know. Drop us an email. You can email me, jeremy@whistlekick.com. Of course, you can follow us on social media. We are at Whistlekick everywhere you could imagine. We do all kinds of stuff, all kinds of different podcast episodes. Check them out at whistlekickmartialartsradio.com. And if you want to see the full extent of the things that we offer, from our products to projects, services, and more, go to whistlekick.com. Once again, Craig, I want to thank you for being our guest host for this episode.
Pleasure.
Thanks for coming on. Yeah, you were great. Awesome. Appreciate it.
Super fun.
And Andrew, thanks as always for all that you do for this show and for everything else.
No problem.
All right. Let's close it out. Until next time, train hard, smile, and have a great day.